Now, Acts 10 is the familiar story of Peter going to Cornelius's house to preach the gospel. To me, it's an intriguing story of God directly intervening and people's free will. He does not overpower anybody. And if we'll notice the visions that they have in this chapter, they don't get all of the information in the vision. They have to get part of the information from their encounters with each other to fill out the information. So God just gives them partial information in the visions, and I guess and then they have to act upon that information they get from God and draw some conclusions. We're going to see quite a few conclusions drawn in this chapter based upon the things of God. Of course, the most significant, I guess, the most significant thing about this chapter is that God wants the gospel for everybody. And Peter states that in verse 34 of the 10th chapter. And I think that if this were a chiasm, this would be the center of it. He said, opening his mouth, Peter said, I most certainly understand now that God is not one to show partiality, but in every nation, the man who fears him and does what is right is welcome to him. That's to me, the central statement of the 10th chapter. And that's what the 10th chapter is about the gospel being for everybody. And that was completely different than the typical Jewish concept, because the Jews saw themselves as isolated people of God, and they had no interaction with other people. And now we see that Peter realizes that the gospel is for all. And I think, and we'll see God there's some fairly, and I think that's why God directly intervenes in this case here. He intervenes by speaking to Peter and intervenes by speaking to Cornelius. And because of that, he gets two together, and then Peter understands to preach the gospel to Cornelius. So now with that said, let's we talked a little bit about the 10th chapter, the first part of the 10th chapter in Cornelius last week. I just want to mention a few things, and then we'll jump on down to about Cornelius and his background and his vision. Cornelius was a centurion in the Roman army, and he's called a part of the Italian cohort. That means probably he and everybody in his 100 men were from Italy. They were Italians. And so that definitely makes them from outside Judea, makes them Gentiles. But that's one bit of a fact. But the most astounding thing about Cornelius is he's called a devout man, one who fears God and prayed to God continually. So he is a man that knows something about Jehovah God, and he has faith in him, and he prays to him continually. And I think verse 3, it talks about in the ninth hour of the day, he clearly saw in a vision. The ninth hour, if we go back to chapter 3 and verse 1, the ninth hour of the day is when the hour of prayer was at the temple, because Peter and John went up to the temple at the ninth hour. So Cornelius in his house apparently has adopted a Jewish custom of praying to God every day at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, because it actually, it mentions a little later here that when Cornelius is recounting what went on there, he says, I was praying in my house whenever this angel appeared to him. So he is a very devout man who apparently regularly prays to God. And whenever the message came to him, he says, what is it, Lord? And then he immediately acted upon the message. He didn't question God. When God said, you send to Joppa for a man named Peter, you go get him, and he has something to tell you. And so that's all the story that Cornelius, he didn't know what Peter had to tell, what it was about. Obviously, it relates to him and God. But so he acted on it, and he sends his two servants and a devout soldier. Does that mean that Cornelius has now influenced one of his soldiers too, who's a believer in God, even before Peter comes to preach? We've got a devout soldier that's going with two of his servants. It's possible the two servants could have been Jewish people, but the soldier, if he's in Cornelius's Italian band, he is Italian, like Cornelius probably is. So he's a Gentile also. So that's kind of where we got with Cornelius. The angel spoke with him and telling him to send for Peter. And so they leave Caesarea, which is about 30 to 35 miles from Joppa, where Peter is. And of course, they're not on a bus, they're walking by foot. And so it's going to take a fairly good while. It's going to be the next day whenever they get to where Peter is. And now we jump down in 9 through 16, we have this event involving Peter. It says, on the next day they were on their way approaching the city. That's the two servants and the soldier. And Peter went up on the housetop about the 6th hour to pray. Now, Peter's going up at noon to pray. That's not necessarily the Jewish custom, but Peter's going up at noon to pray. And he became hungry, and he wanted something to eat, and they were fixing him lunch. And while that delay was going on, my version says he fell into a trance. Some says he had a vision. Anyway, God directly communicates with Peter, either in a trance, and of course we know this, what Peter saw. He saw this great, it's called an object. Sometimes it's called, I think my translation calls it a sheet. It's full of animals of every kind, clean and unclean, and it descends, and it says, Peter, rise, kill, and eat. And of course, Peter say, not so, Lord, not me. I've never eaten anything unclean. It repeats it 3 times. Anytime something's repeated 3 times, God means it. He means it on one time. When he repeats it 3 times, it's definitely an emphasis. So he repeats it 3 times. And I think to me, in verse 17, Peter was greatly perplexed. With the Jewish background, God's sending him a vision to eat these unclean animals. That would be perplexing to him. Eddie?
And I always thought that's such an ironic statement. By no means Lord, or not so Lord. The very definition of Lord means I submit my will to you.
Right.
But then to say, but I'm not going to do what you say, then he's not your Lord.
And I'm glad you brought that up, because that's the opposite of what Cornelius did. Cornelius got his message from God, and it says immediately he sent these 3 men on the way. Peter gets his message. God says, no, I can't do that. So I just think that he resisted that. But we're going to see Cornelius and his house all through this. Whenever they learn, get the information, they respond immediately to the information in a positive way. So Peter's greatly perplexed. Now, I just want to mention a passage here back in Mark, the 7th chapter, verses 14 through 19, and I hope it's this is an occasion where Jesus is dealing with the Pharisees and their unclean. Let's mark the 7th chapter. And the Pharisees are dealing with this disciple, or complaining about the disciples, and some of the things they're doing are not clean by the ceremonial standards of the Pharisees. Down to verse 14 of Mark the 7th says, after he called the crowd to him again, he began saying to them, listen to me, all of you, and understand. There's nothing outside the man which can defile him if it goes into him, but the things which proceed out of the man are what defile the man. In verse 17, when he had left the crowd and entered the house, his disciples questioned about the parable. And he said to them, Are you so lacking understanding also? Do you not understand that whatever goes into the man from outside cannot defile him, because it does not go into his heart, but into his stomach is eliminated? Thus he declared all foods clean. Peter had not grasped that concept that Jesus, when we're here in Acts, the 10th chapter. Now he is going to, by the end of it, but Jesus's teaching has always been about bringing the gospel to everybody, and about him being Lord of all, and about this separation and breaking down the barrier. Even that teaching there where he declared all foods clean. So I just thought that was an interesting reference to look at, and Peter hadn't grasped that idea. So anyway, Peter has this vision, and he's perplexed, and he gets his answer immediately. 3 guys knock on the door looking for Peter. Now, it says while Peter's pondering these things, these 3 guys knock on the door. How do you think they found Simon's house so easy? Pardon?
Sure, they were led by the Spirit on that.
Well, they knew he was a tanner. They didn't have Google Maps, I don't think. But they probably, if they had their nose and asked anybody in town where the tanner lived, they could probably find his house. That may be why it's recorded for us that Simon was a tanner, that it would have been an obvious place. But anyway, they come to Simon a tanner, and they find Peter there, and then in verse 19, Peter was reflecting on the vision, and the Spirit said to him, "Behold, 3 men are looking for you. But get up and go downstairs and accompany them without misgiving, for I have sent them myself." This response, Peter seems to respond positively toward, because he's going to say over here later when he's recounting this that I'm here because I realized that God had sent me. And so he did not balk about it. He's beginning to have some understanding of this vision he's seen. So in verse Cornelius' story is recounted for us 4 times in these 2 chapters. It's given by the narrator or Luke of the chapter. We just looked at that in the first 8 verses. Now the men who come to Peter are going to recount a portion of that story, so that Peter this is the more information that Peter needs that the vision did not reveal to him. In verse 22 and 23, it says, they said, Cornelius, a centurion, a righteous and God-fearing man, well spoken of by the entire nation of the Jews, was divinely directed by a holy angel to send for you and to come to his house to hear a message from you. So now Peter knows some more of the story. God has said, go with these men. Now that he knows why he's going with these men, he's going with these men to deliver a message from God. And obviously any message that Peter has from God is the same message he's been preaching everywhere. It's the gospel of Jesus Christ. And so he invited them in and gave them lodging. Now, just a little question I have on that. Simon the tanner is most likely a Hebrew, a Jew, because he got the name Simon, and Peter is living with him. We've got this we could have had 2 Jewish servants, but we got a Gentile soldier. Apparently, they now understand enough to give that Gentile soldier lodging. That's a supposition on my part that we're seeming like we're moving closer to an understanding of what God wants them to do. But they gave them lodging. And of course, the reason why they would give them lodging for the night, they've gotten there in the middle of the day. They walked 35 miles to get there. And now they're going to get up and walk 35 miles back. And so they're going to go leave the next morning. And that's what we're going to get to down here in the chapter or in verse 24 and on. The next day they got up and they left Joppa, and they took some brethren with them. This is going to be significant later in the chapter, and over in the 11th chapter, even as he's going to take, because Peter is about to set out on a strange mission. He's going to a Roman centurion's house. He's going to deliver them a message. And as we're going to see when he gets to the Roman centurion's house, he's going to say, it's not customary, it's not legal by Jewish custom for me to come into your house. And so he's going to set out on his mission, and he's going to do wherever these men lead him is where he's going to go. And so he's going to take along some of the Jewish brethren from Joppa with him. Okay, the next day in verse 24, they enter Caesarea, and we find Cornelius is waiting for them. I suspect Cornelius has calculated the time. It takes them that long to walk over there, spend the night, and get back, and they'll be here about this time of the day. Is probably what Cornelius has done. And he had all of his relatives and close friends were there at the house. So Cornelius is anticipating words from Peter, but we're going to see later he's anticipating words from God. And so it's an important occasion for Cornelius, and he's brought together everybody he can to hear this. Any thoughts down to that point? So you see, Cornelius is a person who has faith, he's anxious, and he's prepared, is the way I would describe him. In verse 25, it says, when Peter entered, and apparently Peter, we're going to see Peter enter 2 times here in this section. He's going to enter, and I suppose he entered into a courtyard or something and meets Cornelius. And then a little later, it's going to say he entered the area where the people were assembled. So he enters, and Cornelius met him and fell at his feet and worshiped him. That's an interesting, to me, situation. We have this Roman centurion who is in Caesarea. Caesarea is the chief Roman city in Judea. He has the authority of the Roman government, and he falls down at the feet of this fisherman from Galilee. Now, why does he do that?
Back in verse 1, he's a devout man.
He's a devout man. He realized that God had sent the man to him with a message that he needed to hear. And so he falls down at his feet. No. And it says, my translation says, worship him. I don't think all the translations say worship, but some of them say they fell down prostrate before him, paying homage or honor to him, not necessarily worshiping him as God. So with Cornelius, if he was a believer in the Jehovah God, he would realize that no man is equal to God or deserves worship. So it sounds like he is so overcome with gratitude for Peter coming and God sending Peter that he falls down before him. I think there's 2 things involved in this. One is, here's a man of high social status, and Peter's a man of low social status. But I think what Peter's going to say for Peter's benefit, the Jews looked at themselves as superior to the Romans, or to the Romans or the Gentiles. So either one of these people could have looked at themselves as superior to the other. But Peter says, when he falls down, Peter raised him up, saying, stand up, I too am just a man. I'm just like you. Indicating that Peter now realizes, and I think he now realizes that he's no better than a Jew is no better than a Gentile. I'm just like you. We both need God. I may be putting too much into that, but I think Peter is now at this point in his understanding based on his visions. And when the angel said to him, Peter, they're at the door, go with them and don't resist anything. Yeah, then here's the second enter. As he talked with him, they entered and found many people assembled. So they must have, to me, they probably entered the gate or the courtyard. Cornelius was there waiting. He's got everybody assembled some in a meeting room. And now he takes Peter into the meeting room. Okay, any thoughts there? Yeah, David?
Yeah, I just love how Cornelius is evangelizing. He doesn't even know what the message is yet.
He's personal evangelist, isn't he?
He just knows, I'm about to hear something from God. I've got to get the people I care about to know this too.
I want all of y'all to hear it. And just because, and I think because that soldier was a devout soldier, I think that gives us some insight into Cornelius' influence on those around him. They already had respect for him, for them all to assemble for this message, I believe. Thank you, David. Okay. Then in verse 28, we have Peter make that statement about, you yourselves know how unlawful is for a man who is a Jew to associate with a foreigner or to visit him, and yet God has shown me that I should not call any man unholy or unclean. And I think that's because Peter says that, I think that's back in verse 26. It kind of influences my perception there of Peter when he says, I'm a man just like you. I'm no greater or better than you are. And so a few days ago, Peter would have still had that Jewish concept in his mind. And then in verse 29, he says, that's why I came without even raising any objection when I was sent for. So ask for what reason you have sent me. So now, I said Peter didn't get all the information with the vision. He got a little information with the vision. He got a little bit more information from the soldiers and the two men who came. And now he's going to get an explanation from Cornelius of why Cornelius wants him to be there. Of course, obviously, Peter recognizes that God has sent him and that Peter needs to interact with these Gentile group of people. Okay, anything else there? Okay, in 30 through 33, Cornelius recounts his story. This is the third time the story is told in this chapter. Each time sometimes it's fuller than the others, but each time it has something a little bit different piece of information there. Sometimes the angel's called a man, or sometimes the person that appeared to Cornelius is called an angel, sometimes called a man. It apparently was an angel from God that appeared to him. Okay. And then he explains that he was praying in my house during the ninth hour, and a man stood before me in shining garments. Here's a man in shining garments. So before he was called an angel. So I guess this might be where we get the idea that angels have halos and shiny garments. I don't know. It would have sparkled or shiny. So the person who stood before him was no ordinary person. And probably was an angel, that says in another place there. And then verse 31, which we need to probably talk about just a little bit. It said, Cornelius, your prayer has been heard and your alms have been remembered before God. This is, over the years, give people some consternation because we have so many religious people that say they can pray through to God for salvation. And that's not what Peter says to Cornelius, or what the angel said to, or the man there in the said to Cornelius. He says, God has noticed, has heard your prayer, and all that you're doing, God has observed that. Well, God observes everything in this world, whether it be good or evil. And I thought of a psalm to me that kind of knowing the character of Cornelius in Psalms 24. I know a lot of people, Psalms 23 is their favorite psalm, but I think Psalms 24 is almost my favorite psalm now. And the question is asked in Psalm 24, and I think it's applicable in this this place here. It says, I find the verse I was looking here. Yeah, in verse 3 of Psalms 24. Who may ascend to the hill of the Lord, and who may stand in his holy place? The question is asked there in Psalms 24, who can stand before God? And Cornelius is standing before God. His prayer has been heard, and God has observed his good deeds. And verse 4 says, he who has clean hands and a pure heart, who has not lifted up his soul to falsehood and has not sworn deceitfully. A person of integrity is a person that God will listen to. Now, it doesn't mean that Cornelius' salvation, Cornelius is a sinner like all of us, but he's a person of integrity, and God saw a person of integrity who was wanting a message or wanting to know the gospel. And so God sent the preacher, so you go find your preacher and he'll deliver the message to you. And so I think this is an intriguing example of God's direct intervening and God leaving things to mankind to do that man can do. And so God didn't give Cornelius the answer. He did not save him based upon his prayers or his alms, but he sent Peter, and that's what he's going to say in verse 32. Therefore send to Joppa and invite Simon, who is also called Peter, to come to you. He is staying in the house of Simon the tanner. And so he says, there's a man that can help you. Go send and get him, and he can help you. And we're going to see now Peter's going to preach the message down here in a few minutes, or down here in the later part of the chapter. But this is not a promise of salvation in verse 31 there. The fact that God would hear his prayer, God understands and knows what everybody prays. Now, that doesn't mean he's going to save them based on their prayer. But he understands, and when he finds just my opinion here is, this indicates that a sincere person who is looking for God will have the opportunity to find him, is what I think this suggests. And I think that's what the verse is telling us. That's my idea. There's some comments. Eddie, you got something to say on that?
Look at it from the viewpoint of God also. God wants to save everything.
Yes.
And so if there's someone who is willing to be saved, God's going to find a way to do it.
Right. Okay. And now, I do think Cornelius is a special case here, because we had to get the Jewish apostles in the mindset that they wanted to take the gospel to the Gentile world. And so that's very much, we're going to see, we have our second Pentecost here in just a few minutes. And so the first day of Pentecost, with all the miraculous things going on, was to get the people to see that we're now moving from the law of Moses to Jesus Christ. It was for the Jewish people. They'd all been devoted to the law for 1,000 years. And now we're moving from that to Jesus Christ. And so we have this spectacular event, similar in many ways to the spectacular event that happened on Mount Sinai. When they came out of Egypt, said, we're moving from idolatry, we're moving to worship Jehovah. And then here in Acts 2, this spectacular event, we're going to move from worshiping at the temple under the law of Moses to serving Jesus Christ and depending upon him. And so now this spectacular event is going to occur to show that we're bringing everybody in. God had to put his stamp of approval on this event. And so that's why I think Cornelius is so significant for us. And that's what I believe Luke records it for us, because remember, Luke was saying, he's writing to someone named Theophilus. And with that, we think he's a person of Greek origin that has maybe never even been to Jerusalem or know anything about Jerusalem. And now where he's living in a Greek-speaking area, the gospel is there and people around him are becoming Christians. And Luke's explaining to him in an orderly fashion how it came to be like this. So this is a key point in how it came to be like this, is getting the gospel to the Gentiles or the Roman nation. Other thoughts here? All right. Okay, we're going to see. I really believe that this is an abbreviation of Peter's sermon. Just Peter, then in verse 34, he opens his mouth and like I said, I think verse 34 and 35 are the very heart of the chapter. Way early tonight, isn't it? Did you ring that bell, Kelly? Okay. I most certainly understand now that God is not one to show partiality, but in every nation, a man who fears him and does what is right is welcome to him. That was Cornelius to a letter, right? God is welcoming Cornelius to come. Now, that doesn't mean that Cornelius is saved at this point. It just means that God is willing to, he's the kind of a person that can come to God's holy hill, is one who is willing to respond. Now, if I can just do another little editorial preaching thing here. I think that's extremely important for us who profess to be Christians. In every nation, a man who fears him and does what is right is welcome to him. That's our responsibility as Christians, is to fear God and do what is right. We can't pretend or play with this. And I think that's what he's saying there with that passage. Okay. Yes.
I agree with you. This is the central section of this story. And to me, it's so revealing in the way that God reveals this to people. You mentioned earlier at the beginning that God doesn't give the whole message at any one point, but he reveals portions of it and gave Peter the ability to be able to connect all the dots. God drew all the dots, but he gave Peter the ability to make the connections of the dots. And that's very important for us as Christians, yes, that we live in a world, we want everything just cut to the chase, give me the answer and let me go on. But we don't learn as much that way, and it doesn't stick. But when we go through the process to actually connect all the dots, we learn more, we remember more. And I think that's the way God created us, and that's what we see here.
I'm glad you brought that up, Eddie, because to me, that's one of the key lessons of this whole chapter, is that here's God's word, but he's using his word and these illustrations to change Peter's thinking. Peter's thinking and what he believes and how he responds to that is what's crucial for Peter to have free will. And so God does not bend or twist our will. He gives us the opportunity to learn and to choose to follow him. And that's what that's key all through this. He gave Cornelius that opportunity. He says, go send for this man. And he tells Peter, go down there and go with him. Don't, so it places the responsibility of each one exercising his faith and his will to accomplish that in his own life. And I think it's key for that perspective. Thank you, Eddie. Other thoughts? And then in verse 36 through 38, he goes through the idea that, well, I'm on in 36 particularly, I want to mention the word which he sent to the sons of Israel, preaching peace through Jesus Christ. He is Lord of all. That Lord of all, in my translations, is in parentheses at the end of the sentence. Some writers think he is Lord of all is the primary statement of verse 36, that he is Lord of all, therefore he can bring peace to all people. Seems to be the idea. And again, that's it. All men are included in that statement, not just Jews or Gentiles. And the word which he sent to the sons of Israel, preaching peace through Jesus Christ, he is Lord of all, or he is Lord of all, and peace through him. This seems to be the beginning point for Peter in his message. That's how I think he said several other words, but it's interesting how they message are sometimes presented. Peter begins here, Cornelius and his house believe in Jehovah God. He begins with the message from Jehovah God declaring Jesus is Lord of all. And so that's what Cornelius has got to understand and got to accept. And so that's where he, and then he, in the next few verses here, he verifies or he testifies, I guess I would say, to the things that Jesus did. He bears witness. And we're going to see in verse 39 and verse 41, he's going to use this word witness 2 times. We are witnesses of all these things, the miracles, his death, his resurrection. You all have heard about them, but we saw them. We're witnesses of these things. And so he's putting validity to what he's about to tell him about Jesus. He is the one that's come from God. Okay. Terrible place to end here. And he goes ahead and verifies this with the prophets. He again, remember one of the words we had in the beginning was that the apostles were witnesses. Here Peter states it, and that's what this book is about. The book of Acts is about evidence or witnesses that Jesus is God. And so here he's bearing witness to that. We'll talk about a little bit about 44 through 48 on next week and try to get through chapter 11. Thank you very much.